Alrighty, here we are at lecture 9. And I'm taping this a bit later in the day, and I can see that the sun is starting to creep in. So I hope I can finish the lecture before there's too much light and it distorts everything. Okay? Anyway, all right. So as you can see from the notes, this lecture is based more structure. I mean, I keep pushing that over and over, and then usage, sentence construction, a whole lot of little things. And so, in lectures 9 and 10, I'm basically going to be giving you pointers to help you with your final. All right, and so with the major essay. So basically, some of the stuff that I talk about today, not quite sure how long the lecture will take, but some of the things I'll talk about today, they may apply to you and they may not. What I mean by that is, if you're getting really strong grades in this course, some of this information you may already know, or you just may find irrelevant. But for others, for those of you who maybe are struggling a bit, lectures 9 and 10 will be very helpful. All right, you'll see what I mean. And so in the notes, it actually says chapters 8 to 10 of the Canadian Practical Stylist. All that means is that's basically where I took a lot of this information, but I didn't ask you to read that book, all right? Or to purchase that book, I should say. So don't worry about that. All right, so let's start then with some really simple things, okay? The simple sentence. Every sentence is made up of someone or something, and that someone or something becomes the subject. And then we have a verb construction. There's another term for that, but don't worry about that. But there's a verb construction that goes along with the someone or the something, the subject. Okay? So let's look at something really simple, really simple. And I see the light starting to creep in. I better hurry. But anyway, all right. So keep the action at the beginning of your sentences. All right? What do I mean by that? In different languages, sometimes the action of the sentence happens later on, okay? But in English, we like to have the action of the sentence happening early, okay? At the beginning. Not always. If you remember back, we talked a bit about transitional sentences, right? Where in that case, the action will be happening in the second part of the sentence. But for the most part, you want your subjects near the beginning, okay? All right. So let's take a look at a very simple sentence. John hit the baseball. So in that sentence, then we have a subject, John. Remember, someone or something. Then we have the verb hit. What did John do? What about John? Well, he hit. All right. And then the baseball that could have been anything. Could have been the soccer ball. Could have been whatever. Well, you wouldn't hit a soccer ball, but you follow what I mean. And then that would be the object of the sentence. So, thinking back, that's the basic construction of of a proper sentence in English. But of course, these things can become much more sophisticated, right? So now let's get into that sophistication. I promised you early on in the lectures, I said we will get more sophisticated, and you will be tested on this for the second grammar quiz. All right. So, and keep in mind for the second grammar quiz, that can be on anything I talked about in grammar, going right back to lecture 3. All right, or anything else along the way. Excuse me. All right. So now there are different types of sentences that we can construct. We have what are known as compound and complex sentences. And so let's try not to get too complicated with these terms, all right? You can see the light just creeping in, right? Anyway, so a compound sentence. Let's start with that. It links simple sentences with a coordinating conjunction. You just went to sleep, right? Okay, don't fall asleep. These terms, they're very straightforward. If you think about coordinating, think about your like the outfit you chose for the day. When we coordinate, things go together. That's all that means, right? And a conjunction is one of those connecting words that I talked about. Oh gosh, I can't even remember when. Maybe in lecture 1 and lecture 3. Okay, but anyway, and so the key you want to understand here is that the compound sentence treats everything on the same level. And so the most common word we would use in a compound sentence would be the word and, right? And is your friend, okay? I could make a joke about that, but I won't. It has to do with daddy. But anyway, okay, I won't. All right. So in the compound, everything works together, okay? It's not complicated at all. It's not a very sophisticated type of sentence. And in fact, this is exactly the way you probably started talking when you were a child. When you first started talking, you would say things. If someone asked you how your day went, especially, your first day of school, you would say, well, first we did this, and then we did this, and then we did this, right? So that would be an example of a compound sentence, all right? But then as you got older, your language, I would hope, started to get a bit more sophisticated. All right? Okay. And so the compound, as I said, links everything, links ideas one after the other. And so the word "and" becomes quite common in a compound sentence. And there's your example there, right? We had ice cream and we had cake, and oh, the decorations were wonderful. Okay? All right. Now, we can then start talking about a complex sentence. And this is where things can get a bit tricky. A complex sentence can operate on a number of levels. It hooks lesser clauses onto the main clause. Remember, we talked about clauses a long time ago, right? Long time ago. We talked about clause as being a group of words, but there were different types of clauses, okay? So now we have maybe a lesser clause that gets hooked onto the main idea of the sentence, all right? And I've given you a whole lot of examples here, but the word I'm going to introduce that could be a bit intimidating, in a complex sentence, we now have what we call subordinating connectives, okay? And again, you have various examples, although because there's lots of different ways to do it. Now, don't get intimidated by the word subordinating. That all it means is if I am your subordinate, let's just say we work in the same environment and I am your subordinate, it simply means I am below, right? To be subordinate, to be below. And so in a subordinating sentence, okay, in a complex sentence, right, where you have subordinating clauses, now it simply means everything. The sentence works on a variety of levels. And so the word "and" probably will not be used in a sentence like that. Very, very few times. It can be. I could get into that. I don't think I will. But if you think about it, if I'm suggesting that the sentence could be working on two levels, well, now what's the go-to word? There can be many, but the go-to word probably would be the word "but." And I'm saying one thing, but, well, remember that from lecture 3 once again? Now the sentence is working on two different levels. That's all that means by a complex sentence with a subordinating connective. Okay? So the word "but" immediately suggests there is a second level going on there. Okay? That's what those things mean. Oh, and in the grammar test, I won't ask you to define those terms. I'll simply once again give you sentences and you correct them, okay? If need be. All right? Okay. Yeah, so take a look at the bottom of page 1. We had a great time, although some found fault with the decorations. So, on the one hand, positive, but on the other hand, a bit negative. That's what I mean then by subordinating, right? Things aren't all connecting with the word "and." Although there's other ways we could do it as well. Okay. So, going back to what I said a minute ago, or 8 minutes ago, now in English, as I said, we want the action at the beginning of our sentences for the most part. When we don't, we can get into problems. I'm at the top of page 2 now. When we don't, we can get into problems with something called modification, modifying. And so there are different forms of modifiers. We can have dangling modifiers, or we can have misplaced modifiers. So again, this is all style stuff now that we're doing, right? The majority of the course is done in terms of assignments and things like that. Well, I shouldn't say that. All I mean is now I'm just getting into the stylistic aspect of the course, okay? Getting more specific. And so sometimes the problem with modification, we think that we're modifying one thing in a sentence, but actually the way we've constructed the sentence, we're actually modifying something else. I'm going to give you some perfect examples in a moment. You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to pause here just for a second and see if I can block out some of that light. Okay? Like I said, I'm starting a bit later in the day today. Now I just want to pause. Okay. Okay, I think that works a bit better. All right. I'll just have to rush through everything so until the light starts to come in again. But I think that is a bit better. Anyway, you guys can see me, I think, right? So we're okay with that. So we were talking about modifiers. And so I'm going to show you some examples. Rather than giving you a whole lot of rules, I think it's better just to show you a couple of examples of how modification works. And I've got a couple of pretty good jokes as well that I've come across. All right, so a dangling modifier. That is a word or a clause that modifies a word that is not clearly connected in the sentence. Or, more often, a dangling modifier means you're actually missing a word. You probably need another word in the sentence in order to make it very clear what the connection between the subject and the object is. All right? Okay, so a clear modifier describes, clarifies, or gives more detail. It makes connections. And as I said, I've got perfect examples to show you. Now, this goes back, oh boy. In your assignments, I have told some of you, watch out for this because you tend to make this mistake. The words ending in ing. And I've mentioned it before. We talked about it in group, okay? Or workshop, whatever you want to call it. Words ending in ing. Now, that's not to say you can't use words ending in ing, but here's your rule. Be careful when you begin a sentence with a word that ends in ing if it is not the subject of the sentence. Okay? When we have words like that, we call them gerunds. And I've written that on some of your on some of the assignments that came in. Gerunds. You have a problem with gerunds. So why is that a big deal? Well, as you know, I'm not a stickler when it comes to some of these rules, but that is one that can really ruin your writing. Okay, gerunds. So let's look at an example, all right? Yes. So I'm going to show you something here, okay? Let's just look at one sentence. I skipped a line. You've got your notes. Having arrived late for practice, okay, comma, a written excuse was needed. Okay, this is an example of poor modification because if I were to write the sentence exactly the way that I have it here, it literally means that the written excuse was late for practice, which doesn't make any sense whatsoever, right? And so, and that then is an example of a gerund. Now, let me clarify. Could I begin a sentence with a word ending in ing and, not worry about? Of course you could. Of course you could. Swimming is a healthy activity. Okay? Nothing wrong with that, right? But that's because in that example, swimming is the subject of the sentence. For the example we have here, the subject is actually a written excuse. And I know that doesn't make any sense, but that's the way you set the sentence up. So watch out for that, all right, in all of your future writing. Okay? Yes. And so, how do we revise that? Well, now we fix the dangling modifier and make it clearer. Having arrived late for practice, comma, the captain of the team needed a written excuse. Now, all of a sudden, it's the captain. The captain, okay, is now the subject of the sentence. So, as I said, you can do this as long as your meaning is clear. But I would suggest watch out for that. So it's words like having, giving, right? When you have words like that at the beginning of a sentence, be careful, okay? Just be careful. All right. Now, much better, what did I start with today? Why not instead, let's get the action at the beginning of the sentence. The captain of the team needed a written excuse because, okay, and then finish the sentence. You see what I mean, right? So works much better. That's what I mean by having the action at the start. Okay, and so bottom of page 2, it's very, very simple. The best way to avoid this, like problems like this, don't begin sentences with ing words. That's how they're referred to, but gerunds, unless they are the subject of the sentence. Okay, that's your rule. And so, as I said, would you fail like a paper simply because you use those incorrectly? No, but it wouldn't help. Okay, that's the easiest way of thinking about it. All right. And so this is one of my favorites. I might have even I might have even used this example just off the top of my head in another lecture earlier on. Having trouble sleeping, the TV helps me through the night. So because of the way I've set that sentence up, right? It's actually the TV that's having trouble sleeping. And I know that doesn't make any sense, right? It doesn't make any sense. But if that's the way you wrote the sentence, that's what it means. And so that would be an example then of dangling modification, right? We have to fix all this. So, once again, why not get the action at the beginning? When I have trouble sleeping, now it's nice and clear. All right? So, as I said, maybe I'm making too much out of this, but avoid those ing words at the beginning unless they are the subject. Okay? All right. Now we also have misplaced modifiers. And that I'll simply read out the three examples I have you here. But that's where you might have a word in a certain place in the sentence and it's modifying something and meaning something. But then you could easily have that word somewhere else and all of a sudden the meaning totally changes. All right? It sounds like a simple thing, but you don't want to make mistakes like that in your writing. So, just quickly, I only had enough money for the show. Meaning, once I paid for the show, that's it. I was broke. Only I had enough money for the show. And now the meaning there is obvious, right? No one else did. I had enough money for the only show. There was only one show. So I went through that very quickly, but you can see what I mean. Sometimes if you have the word in the wrong place in the sentence, which means it is misplaced, right? Then there is a problem. Now, this may not seem all that important when you're looking at like simple sentences like what I have here. But when you're dealing with paragraphing, and sometimes you start to refer to certain things, you may think you're referring to one thing when in fact you're actually referring to something else. All right, so that's the real issue with modification. Okay? All right. And yeah, basically you can improve your writing quite a bit if you start to really understand misplaced and dangling modifiers, making sure your meaning is clear. All right? Okay. Now, this next part, these are headlines I actually found in newspapers, okay? And I will have to explain a few. I'll have to explain a couple. One may be, the reference may be a bit too old for you to understand. But anyway. So, and these, most of these that I've got, you find these in small local newspapers, right? Not necessarily in national media. And I love finding stuff like this. So here's a perfect one right here. Include your children when baking cookies. Okay, so I hope you all see what that actually means. It means the children should be part of the ingredients, okay? If you were to write it that way. Now, obviously, that's not what the writer intended, all right? Or the editor, okay? But that is what it actually means. Drunks get 9 months in violin case. So, yes, we understand that there was probably maybe someone stole a violin or something like that. But that's not what's being said here. Instead, the drunks are going to have to spend 9 months in the violin case. Right? No? I don't know. Anyway. Prostitutes appeal to Pope. That one made me laugh out loud when I saw that. Obviously, what we mean, see, here's an example of a dangling modifier. Ooh, maybe I shouldn't have said it that way. But anyway. what you're missing words, right? So prostitutes make an appeal to Pope, okay? To the Pope, whatever. All right? But the way it's written here, it's suggesting that the Pope finds these prostitutes quite appealing. Okay, I won't do two more. Panda mating fails. Veterinarian takes over. I don't need to say anything about that one, do I? I hope you're laughing right now. And here, okay. See, some of you may get this one. Some of you may be too young, but this is not Hillary Clinton we're referring to. It's her husband, Bill, who was president of the United States. And so, basically, they're suggesting, okay, so he wins the budget. He wins the approval of the budget. And of course, more information will be forthcoming, right? Okay. But instead, there was also a scandal revolving President Clinton in which let's just put it this way. He came on national television after being accused of sexual harassment. And I'll never forget this. He said, I did not have sexual relations with that woman. And if you look up Bill Clinton, that's a pretty good impression of Bill Clinton. And I won't explain exactly how technically he wasn't lying. Technically. I'll just leave it at that. Anyway. Okay. The next two, I hope you're really laughing now, okay? Or I'm not going to say anything else. Now, here's a perfect example of the type of writing that I do come across sometimes where, again, you think you're right, you think you're saying one thing, but it's actually saying something else. Miners refuse to work after death. Now, obviously, the writer meant there was a death in the mine, and so now the miners are refusing to work until better conditions are reached. Okay, but actually, what that sentence is saying is, once I die, I'm never working in this mine again. That's exactly the kind of thing I'm talking about. All right, when it comes to dangling and misplaced modifiers, and also this other one here, when we use the word by. And I have more to say about that word. That's an interesting word when it comes to the construction of sentences. All right? You'll see what I mean. You'll see what I mean. Stolen painting found by tree. So literally, that's suggesting that the tree found the painting. Right? And so I'm going to talk more about the word by. I am, believe it or not. All right? There's a few constructions where that can get us into trouble. I know it sounds silly, like such a simple word, but that's exactly, like I said, that's the way some sentences are constructed, how you can get yourself into problems with your writing. And then finally, I think that's finally, yeah. So two sisters reunited after 18 years in checkout counter. So the intention was that they basically were reunited, okay? They haven't seen each other in 18 years, and finally they see each other in the checkout counter. But that's not what's being said here. What's being said here is they stood in line for 18 years, okay, standing right beside each other, and then finally recognized each other, okay? So that's obviously not what they meant. And I really did find those. I didn't make those up, all right? So my point being, watch out for modification. Make sure that you are actually referring to the thing you think you're referring to, okay? All right. Yes, I know that was poor grammar the way I said that sentence, but if I'd said it properly, it would have sounded really goofy. Okay, so now we're going to do something a bit different here, which is going to come back to things that I've said before. All right? Now, let's talk just a bit about parallel construction. I believe I used that phrase once before, maybe more than once. I'm pretty sure I used it, and I said I'll show you later on exactly what I mean by that. Well, yes, I remember now. Yeah, I believe it was I can't remember the actual lecture number, when I was talking about setting up sections of your argument. And it had to do with, well, there were a couple of examples I gave you. One had to do with failure at university, okay, if you remember that one. I believe it was in lecture 5, where I was doing the cause and effect analysis, right? I'm pretty sure. And so anyway, so I was trying to show you, how do we make things consistent in our writing? And so here's a perfect example right here. Let's take a look at a bad example. This is the example. Actually, this is exactly the example I did off the top of my head. It wasn't in the notes, but here it is now. The woman was confident, intelligent, and knew how to express herself. That's what we mean by faulty parallelism. You're simply not being consistent with the way in which you express yourself. All right? So, and by the way, there's 100 different ways we could do this. The other example I gave was with the sports franchise, right? The sports team leaving a city or something like that. But anyway, let's fix this right now. The woman was confident, intelligent, and articulate. So notice how boom, boom, boom. I'm being consistent with the way in which I express. Now, do you want to do that every time you write a sentence? No. But when would it be very helpful? When you're laying out the sections of your argument in your introduction, right? That would be the perfect time to do it. So, Keep that in mind as well. Okay, keep that in mind. Just being consistent in expression, especially in your introduction. The introduction, it's amazing. The introduction sets up the entire paper. So that's why in lecture 8, I was saying certain things to avoid, watch out for certain things, right? And so yeah, be aware of that, okay? Now, here we go with BY, okay? The passive and active voice. So we kind of started with that today, right? Where I was saying keep the action at the beginning of your sentences, right? And so now, yeah, let's take a look at a passive sentence and then let's fix it. The bill was approved by the board. This is a construction that I used to do quite often, right? When I first came to university, I happened to just, for some reason, I just wrote in the passive voice. And so if you've ever been told that you write in the passive voice, chances are the word by, that word, is in the sentence near the end, right? And so instead, how about we simply get the action at the beginning of the sentence? The board approved the bill. Now notice that the word by is gone. So quite often, when we set a sentence up and the word by is near the end of the sentence, there's a very good chance the actual subject of the sentence, right, will be found later on. So instead, we move to the active, get the action at the beginning of your sentence, the board approved the bill. For those of you whose first language is French, you would probably modify with the first example, right? Because that's typically the way modification works in French and other languages, right? It just so happens in English, it's done a bit differently, okay? And if you're not sure what I mean by that, we can talk about that in workshop as well, okay? And so, some other simple style things. The phrase to be, which we talked about with infinitives a while back, right? Avoid to be on its own, meaning he seems to be upset. Well, why not instead just write he seems upset? Unless you need to fill out a word count, right? Oh, I'm missing 2 words. Oh, to be will fit in there. And also, the phrase use of. His use of dialogue is effective. Well, why not just write his dialogue is effective? Okay? But again, for a word count, maybe make a note of that. Ooh, those are good ones to actually include. Okay. Now, we then get to, yeah, this is denotation and connotation. Now, I'm hoping that many of you learned these words in grade 8, right? Grade 7 or grade 8. But I'm going to show you something in just a moment, all right? So, denotation refers to the literal meaning of the word, the dictionary definition, right? So if you look up the word snake in the dictionary, you will discover its denotative meanings, and then you have this long, lengthy, and probably not very effective definition, right? Remember we talked a bit about definition in lecture, oh gosh, that might have been in lecture 5 as well. Okay. Connotation, on the other hand, refers to the associations that are connected to a certain word or emotional suggestions related to that word. So if I called you a snake, okay, that means something very different. But we should also be aware that these things are cultural. So what may have negative connotations in one culture may actually not have negative connotations in another, right? And I'm sure some of you right now are thinking, yeah, no, I totally get that, especially if you've come to Canada, right, to study, right, from another culture. Then yeah, well, the notes are pretty straightforward here. And so, a denotation is a specific meaning, okay, dictionary meaning. Connotation, the figurative cultural assumptions. So different words can mean different things in different cultures, right? Now, if you think about like a stop sign, there are times where you could be driving in rural areas in Canada, and there may be. Well, think about if you're driving in Quebec. Think if you're driving in Quebec and you come towards a stop sign, and it doesn't say stop, It says array, right? Okay. But because of the shape of the sign and the color and everything else, you can associate it, right? So, and that's kind of the. Now, the reason why I brought this up is partly because it was in the chapter that I was looking at, but also, believe it or not, and some of you may be screaming at me right now saying, yes, I know this because this is actually the study of semiotics, which sounds very, very complicated, right? There was a guy named Ferdinand de Saussure, and he developed this whole theory on subjects and signs, etc. And he suggested that each sign, okay, had two components. It had what he called the signify, the actual thing itself, and the signifier, what it stood for. All right. Did I just do that backwards? Signifier, sorry. So the actual thing itself was the signifier. Yeah, I did that backwards. I don't know why. But then there were the other meanings, okay? And that would be the signified, okay? Signifier, signified. But as I said, but the funny thing about this is, yeah, we learned this in grade 8, but he got a whole career out of this, and we all study semiotics nowadays anyway, don't we? Right? Not all of us, but many of you, I'm sure, in certain disciplines, that word has come up, right? If you're interested, there's a great book called The Subject of Semiotics by someone named Kaja Silverman, which I use in other courses, right? Very interesting things. So yeah, so the stop sign. Without even words, we recognize the meaning from the shape, the color, etc. All right? The light is creeping in. The light is creeping in. Release the Kraken. Anyway, okay. Now here's an important one, and I'm not trying to be woke or neoliberal, but inclusive and non-sexist language. This is very handy for a couple of reasons, and I'm not talking ideological at all here. Sometimes people feel the need to write S/HE, right? She, he, or he or she. But when we do that over and over again in our writing, the writing starts to get clunky. So I'm not being political at all here, all right? I'm simply suggesting, yeah, you want to avoid phrases like that. Instead, write in the plural they. Makes it so much easier. And that's becoming much more common, much more acceptable, as I'm sure you're all aware, okay? So yeah, think about that too, okay? Again, I didn't mean that from a political or woke point of view. I simply meant it clears up your writing. There was a guy, it's funny, I was teaching out in British Columbia about, a long time ago. And there was one fellow out there who considered himself a strong feminist. And so anytime in a meeting, like in a staff meeting or what have you, anytime anyone said he, okay, referring to the general, he would always say or she. And so I learned later on, I was only there for one summer, and I learned later on his nickname behind his back was Orshi. I love that. Orshi. Orshi. Anyway, so use they. Just use they. And again, that's the kind of thing we have talked about in workshop. These are the things, like small things, they just pop up and, okay, think about that. Okay. Now, we then have euphemisms. And again, I'm covering this only because it was in the chapter. I don't have to spend much time on that. I'm not going to spend too much time on that. But you see the words there, right? And there are many others. Yeah, I'm just going to jump now to page 6. There are hundreds of examples of euphemisms. Some that basically want to sound more polite, like lessen the hardship or they basically lessen the blow when it comes to certain information. When we think of dying, we usually say the phrase "passing on," right? And that's not a negative. Like, we think of euphemisms all the time as being negative. Not necessarily. But quite often euphemisms can be connected with taboos as well. And I'm not going to get into that. All right, I'm not going to get into that. We can talk off camera. All right, about that. But you have layoff, downsizing, right sizing, headcount adjustment. I like that one. They all mean basically being fired. Okay, or being let go. All right. And so this brings us then to words, language. That's why I threw in euphemism if you've ever wondered what it means or what have you. I'm sure you all know. But vocabulary. This is an interesting concept when it comes to learning a language or improving your vocabulary. When I was young, I was told to improve your vocabulary, you should read a newspaper. Keep reading the newspaper every day. That is not a very good suggestion. And if anyone has told you that, if you're learning the language, that is not the best way to learn it. Because newspapers, they have their own style of writing, right? And they don't follow many of the rules that I've been trying to show you in this course. And so, believe it or not, I usually ask this in class, and no one ever gets anywhere near the number. There are well, right now, this is going to look contradictory, the way I say this on the very first line of page 6. There are over 1 million words in the English language right now, okay, that actually exist out there, floating around. Now, the Oxford English Dictionary, that's why I have the OED, the hardcover edition, if you've ever seen the actual real hardcover edition of the Oxford English Dictionary, it can take up almost the length of a room. And I'm not exaggerating. The English department had a set, and it took up like 3/4 of a wall. We're talking, and these books are very big, and they come with a magnifying glass because the type is so small. So that's how many words there are. Now, of course, we're moving everything towards online, electronic, right? So you can look up the Oxford English Dictionary online. But in 2037, the year 2037, that is the next time that Oxford is planning on actually putting out hardcover copies, right? So what I'm suggesting is right now, there's 1 million words out there because all those words exist. But when the hardcover edition comes out, it's going to be even larger. And the interesting thing about vocabulary is words come into the nomenclature, that's the term we use, common usage, and some go out. And so here's a selection of some of the new words that were introduced in the last version in 2015. Don't get me wrong, by the way, there were always new versions coming out. I just mean that was the last one where we had the actual books, all right, as opposed to online. Things are changing all the time online, as you guys know. I'm sure in this course I've probably made a mistake or two when it came to maybe document like something because things changed after I did the lecture. Happens all the time, okay? But of course, if that ever came up, I would have emailed you and made sure I made the correction, okay? But it does. Things happen so quickly. Anyway, okay. So I've given you some selections here, some examples, but there was one in particular that I was curious about. Brain fart. Hasn't that term been around for quite a while? I was surprised that it came in so late. Like I thought that phrase had been around. I remember using that phrase in high school. Right? And that was 125 years ago. So, yeah. Yeah, only 25 years later after high school. Looked pretty good, right? Butt dial. Okay. That one makes sense only because of smartphones and everything else, right? Like it would have been hard to butt dial someone with the old rotary phones. Yeah. Anyway. Cat cafe. That one makes me laugh. Yeah. But I don't want to get anyone angry with me, so I'll just leave that one alone. Hangry. Okay, there's a good example, right? We do hear that now. Well, isn't there? There's a commercial for is it Snickers? Yeah, there's a candy bar anyway. A candy bar. Well, that's what we called it back in the 1930s, where we all used to wear an onion on our belts as well. That's a phrase from Grandpa Simpson. But anyway. Manspreading. You guys all know about that one, right? Manspreading. Okay. And I've given you all the definitions here. Oh, but here's a good one to know, all right? MX. Pronounced mix, okay? Or mux. And basically, a title sometimes used... I don't think this one will last very long, but a title used before a person's surname, okay, or full name, who wishes to avoid specifying their gender, okay? Or does not want to identify themselves as male or female. But it's almost as if that one, yeah, I wonder about that one. Because, of course, we've seen with Mrs., right, MRS, that's gone by the wayside, right? You rarely see that nowadays. And even Mr. Like, I find that one odd as well. Why we even need those things anymore, right? But anyway, okay, so we're coming to. I figured this lecture would be around 40 minutes. So I said, how do we increase our vocabulary when there's a million words? Well, it's very simple. It really is very simple if you're interested in this stuff. Last week, I was down at the courthouse here in town for reasons which are not important here. And I noticed, I'm joking by the way, but well, maybe not. I noticed that the judge looked disinterested. So in class, okay, when we're not online, I ask the class, like, is that a good thing or a bad thing? And most people will say, well, that's a bad thing. Actually, no, it's a good thing because the prefix dis actually means apart, okay, separate from. Whereas if I had said to you, the judge looked uninterested, okay, now you know exactly what I mean because un means not. And so, if you wish to increase your vocabulary, learn prefixes and suffixes. And for a further explanation of that, I have included a file under this lecture. You'll see, and it's actually a whole list of prefixes and suffixes, and they only touch the surface. There are so many more, all right? But it's a good idea to understand terms like that, all right? Well, isn't it funny if you think about bi now instead of by, by, two, right? And try, three, okay? And uni, okay, one. So lots of things like that. So as I said, if you wish to increase your vocabulary, think about that. Prefixes and suffixes. Take a look at the list that I have there. All right. But again, there's so many more. And so near the end of the lecture, the light is getting closer and closer. So it's time for me to say goodbye. All right. Anyway, we'll see you in lecture 10. Okay? Take care. Bye.